Claude 3 has just released, and there are three new models that are pretty exciting. The first one being Opus, the other one being Sonnet and Haiku. So, Opus is the one that is the most expensive, but also provides the highest level of intelligence. Sonnet is the one you want to use for things like retrieval augmented generation, and it's like the middle way in terms of cost. And Haiku is their fastest model used for lightweight tasks. In terms of what we're going to look at today, I like the Sonnet that does data processing, and so that's the only one that's also available from Amazon Bedrock as of today, but Haiku and Opus are coming soon. If we wanted to take a look at the different benchmarks that are available, you'll see that Claude 3 is beating pretty much all of the other state-of-the-art models. I don't put much weight into benchmarks these days. We'll see when we actually use these things in practice. But based on the benchmark numbers here, it's pretty well above a lot of the state-of-the-art stuff. And this also brings in vision capabilities to something like Amazon Bedrock in one unified model. So with Claude 3, you'll be able to not only do summarization of text and things, but you'll also be able to just add in an image and use it within that summarization and get back some pretty cool responses. I didn't have this problem because I wasn't such a big user of Claude, but it seems like people are excited about it not refusing to answer you. So with Claude, the focus has always been to create safer models. They're a little bit more on the enterprise business side, so they don't want to have their models returning any information or returning responses that could be considered harmful or not totally okay with its end users and customers. So apparently with this new version, it'll be less on the side of flagging things that are just not really harmful, but it'll be more able to distinguish when someone is just asking a benign question. So also with this model, I want to highlight is the ability for it to do needle in the haystack work. So with RAG, there's a lot of the need to look at a large PDF and find maybe something very specific in that document and reference it when you're doing retrieval augmented generation. With the context windows getting larger and that these models are getting more accurate in terms of how they can pinpoint things up in the context windows, it's going to be really interesting to see if retrieval augmented generation stays as a technique that is used by common engineers, or does it become a super specialized thing in the future, especially with how stuff is trending now. So the last piece I'll cover here is the cost. It's actually pretty expensive for Claude 3, but again, I think the target here is enterprise use cases and people who really value security and the control over what the model responses are. So this may make sense at that price point. And for Claude 3 Sonnet, I like here that they really call out what the use cases are. So like I mentioned before, data processing, sales, and time saving. I think this is the one that's going to be the most used by businesses. And the price here, I'd have to really dive into it. I don't know how competitive this pricing is, but from what I've seen from other developers and people, they're saying like these prices are pretty competitive at this rate. So let's jump into an example of how this works. We'll first try it out in Anthropic's Playground, and then we'll try it out in Amazon Bedrock's Playground. One of my favorite tests to run on these type of chatbots is, can it write code, and not like silly code where it's a snake game or you're solving some trivial questions from LeetCode. I want to see it write infrastructure code and see how accurate it can get on this infrastructure code. So here we have a system prompt. You're an expert AWS solutions architect who can code in TypeScript. And then I put in a 3-tier web-based architecture that's pretty standard among developers and people who do cloud applications. And I asked it, based on this architecture, a CDK stack in TypeScript. So let's see how it does. All right, it's done. It took a little bit to generate, but from first look, this is pretty good. It doesn't seem there's too much out of place here. It accurately calls out creating the TypeScript stack. The only thing is it's using a older version of the CDK. So let's try again, and let's say v2 and see if that does better. Now that I called out to write it with the CDK v2, it does call the appropriate library and it does write something very similar. V1 versus v2 is just import differences and some subtle differences here and there, but is important to call out. All right, this looks pretty good. It makes a stack called AWS architecture stack. It sets up our VPC, gives us a security group, which is great. And then it sets up some auto scaling groups that are depicted in the image. And then we have an RDS instance that's set up as well. We have a private with net. I think this might not be correct, but I'd have to check. And then a RDS proxy. So this is good enough. You would have to throw it into your code editor, try it out, and maybe fix a couple things here and there. But this is pretty close and can save a lot of time. So just to make sure we understand what it was trying to interpret, here is the image here. And yeah, it's pretty spot on. I think it didn't catch creating two regions. So let's look at that again. See if it does create two regions. Yeah, it does create two regions here. Great. Cool. All right, let's try this out in the console from Amazon now and see if it has similar performance. So we're going to select the model here, and I got access to this earlier today. If you don't have access yet, just make sure you request it through here. So you're going to have to, although you may have already have access to all the other Anthropic models, this is going to have you request access again. I'll use Cloud 3 Sonnet. That's the only one that's available right now in the playground area. We're going to want to put the temperature down to 0, especially when we're generating code. And then I actually want to copy the same prompt just so we're... And here I don't think you can provide a system prompt, but it should be available if you drop down to code. So I have the same image here, and then I'm asking the same question. Based on this architecture, write a CDK v2 stack in TypeScript. Let's see what it does. All right, so on the first try here, it actually doesn't generate the code. It kind of gives me a description of what's in the stack. It's not wrong, but it didn't give me what I asked it. So this is probably what people are complaining about, which is it sometimes kind of ignores what you want and does its own thing, so you have to fight it. Let's say provide the code to me in Markdown. There you go. After a couple of times, I had to push it in the right direction, but you'll see the code here is very similar. And if we were to copy and paste this into a code editor, maybe there'd be a couple errors or we'd have to tweak it. But in terms of getting a starting point, this is not bad. You get your VPC, especially if you didn't know anything about the AWS CDK and just needed a way to quickly set something up. So this one actually it separated out our public subnets and private subnets, which is great. And then it created our security group. And then it also created a separate security group for our databases. We also have application load balancer, which is great. So in terms of what I like about Claude 3 Sonnet so far, it's that you get a lot of things out of the box. I did want to go through how this might look in actual code. I adapted this from some of my existing code. And essentially, if I wanted to swap over to use Claude 3 now, what I would have to do is update a couple of lines of code. The first one being when I'm using the invoke model command input. And that would just be if you're adding in an image, you want to include the type, the source, and then some data from that metadata for the image. You'd have to do some processing beforehand. And then everything stays the same. It's not much of a lift here. You want to swap out your model ID for the model ID that's provided via the AWS console. They have it listed there. And then you're going to want to process that request by sending it over to Bedrock and then getting back your chat response. An example would be, in this case, I would have the prompt be like, what is this image? And then the image could be that AWS 3-tier web architecture that I sent over the wire. And if you want to see me actually set up a full-blown application using Amazon Bedrock, go ahead and comment below. I might build out a sample application that also uses Claude 3 as well.